So we're back to poetry. I think this talk really resonates with the first talk. So we're really interested in creative writing. We're interested in the domain of aphasia, and we're interested in enabling people with aphasia to do creative writing. I'm Tim. My colleagues Abby, Steph, and Jane were involved in this project, and we're a massive part of this project. I just happen to be presenting it. So hands up, who knows what aphasia is? It's pretty good. Okay, you're quite educated. So aphasia affects about 1 million Americans and is more is more common than Parkinson's disease and cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy. 100,000 Americans acquire aphasia every year, and 85% of Americans haven't heard of it. So you're doing well. So aphasia is a language impairment. It affects a third of stroke survivors. It affects your listening, reading, speaking, and writing, and it may affect a combination of these in varying amounts. So I think this video sums it up better than I can.
I find the analogy with a computer helpful. Particularly when accessing words. You know the word exists, but it's trying to access it.
You lose not only about the words, you can't say a word I can't say. And I often, when I'm tired, I can't remember the words I want to get. And your brain is overload.
Okay, so there's been quite a lot of really nice literature in the HCI community on especially functional communication and rehabilitation. So look at our paper for this. It's a really interesting domain, but we're actually more interested in creativity. So we feel that there's a real area for people with aphasia to be creative, specifically with language. But we feel that currently isn't there, or at least supported by technology. So people with aphasia, and there are people with aphasia who are poets and write great content, we feel that other people maybe aren't supported in the way they could be by technology. So creativity is awesome. It's, it doesn't just enable us to be social in new ways, and especially because of social media and the likes. It enables us to be engage in sort of the world's affairs in a different way, so be social in a different way and be civic, so complain about our MP in a different way, or our president or whoever. And it has great mental health benefits and is generally excellent. And this session is called Creativity. You're all won over, it's fine. Okay, so being creative is challenging, and as we've seen, there are many creative support tools that enable people to be creative and augment their current abilities. But many of these assume high amounts of language, and all creativity methods and tools assume a fair amount of language. So this, you may be familiar with some of these. Premiere Pro, Logic, you can see lots of text and big drop-down menus. And if you have aphasia, these may be challenging to engage with. So we've developed a tool called MakeWrite. It supports people with aphasia to engage in creative writing in a way that they would not otherwise be able to do. So I'll begin with some results. So bottom left, you see a poem, and a female participant's just going to be reading this poem. Okay,
We found love vanished in the wild, memorized because love fled.
Okay, so it cut off a little bit on the corner, but I think the projector's a little. It's fine. You'll be able to see it later. So I'm going to talk about the process of co-designing MakeWrite itself, and also talk about the results of a creative writing workshop that we did with MakeWrite. So we underwent a co-design process. You can see some of the co-design team there. Not quite everybody, almost everybody involved in making the app. So it was two speech and language therapists, one of which is sitting here. Two technology researchers, me and Steph, who is sitting somewhere around there, And this was done over 6 sessions over the course of about a year or so. So we wanted to make creative writing more accessible for people with aphasia, and we were really inspired by constrained creativity. So this is a lovely quote from Stravinsky that I like. If you're familiar with Stravinsky, he's probably one of the better composers of the 20th century, and he wrote in the 70s, the more constraints one imposes, the more it frees oneself of the chains which shackle the spirit. I think this is a really beautiful quote, and what he did is he took ideas like serialism from composers like Berg and Schoenberg, in which they almost mathematically defined what a musical sequence of notes is, and took this into his own music, and essentially constrained the amount of notes that he used to create melodies. So he may take just the notes of a folk melody and just permute them and just vary them around. We're also inspired by blackout poetry. So this is some blackout poetry written on the day that Elon Musk sent his car into space. But the world's so beautiful, the car succumbing to a vortex offered up. So we initially explored these concepts through automated constraints. So actually what we've done here is we've basically cut some holes in a piece of paper and put them over a grid of words. And what it does is it basically just chops out the vast majority of the words, so we can just play about with these words. If you basically turn it upside down, you get a different pattern of words. Simple as that. So we can riff on these words and play about them. This is somewhat limited because you can only do it twice. And so we built a really simple app just to do this in an automated way. And we also brought this out with our consultants, co-designers, and essentially what we're doing is we're just chopping out words. And then we can riff on perhaps this series of words. And if they don't resonate, we can do it again. And we can vary the amount that we take out. And this really worked, actually. This was something that we could collaboratively generate a poem with. So the feedback was basically that over the sort of co-design sessions 3 and 4 of 6, maybe 2 and 3, is that we could allow for a variance of frequency, so that was good. So the amount of words that appear of a given set of words that we're redacting from. One thing that was really important was chunking the groups of words. So you can see in the top left, it's just one word on its own. If you look in the bottom right, we're getting groups of 3 words. So essentially you're retaining more of the initial grammar that you had from this, say, lovely poem. In this case, it's Laurel Ipsum, but it could be a really lovely poem that you had, and you're retaining more of this. And then, obviously, doing this lots of times really helps. So the MakeWrite process is simply to choose a piece of content, do this erasing process, and then move the words around so you can customize it yourself. So here is the initial version of the app. So there's 6 texts. We restricted it to these 6 for the purposes of a workshop. However, you can also paste in your own text if you want. Here's the stage where you do the redaction. Stage where you do the moving a bit around. It's essentially a fridge poetry exercise where you can get new words, delete words. And it looks like this. So you're choosing a word, choosing some text, doing some redaction, so you're refreshing it with the parameters, grouping 2 words together. Okay, we want more words. Okay, we're repeating it until we see some words that we like. Okay, these might be nice words. Take them through. And we just arrange a poem. Simple stuff. So we found this process really enabled people with aphasia, spoiler alert, but we found that people with aphasia were able to engage with this in a way that they would not otherwise be able to engage with language. So you can see here, we're starting to put together a poem, we're spawning new words. We can also delete these words. There it is. Okay, so we took this app to a creative writing workshop to evaluate the app, so to look at how whether it was feasible for people with aphasia to engage with such a creative process with this app. So it was a 2-hour creative writing workshop run at a regular aphasia drop-in, 13 attendees with a variety of aphasic difficulties. So these really ranged from mild, moderate aphasia, which was what the app was designed with, which is something I probably should have mentioned earlier, to severe aphasia, with a variety of reading, writing, understanding. There's more on this in the paper. So the format was essentially a background questionnaire, a demo of the app, quick use of the app in groups of 3 or 4 people, feedback questionnaire, and a poetry recital. So here are some photos from the app, from the workshop, people using the app. And here are some of the results. We'd found love, famished in the wild, memorized because love fled. Poet voice reads his poems to muddle through every sentence. He must quiet his restless sky. So these are really nice, I think. This is my favorite. Stink of rot garden. So this participant in particular, I would assume had more severe aphasia. I can't remember exactly from the data, but he tried to make fun sentences. And he really engaged with just laughing at funny sentences he could make with this app. I found that hilarious. Okay, so some overview of results. There's more detail in the paper, so in general, people felt that they were able to write poems that they would otherwise be unable to write, which I think is good. However, it's not all positive. Some people felt that the poem that they created was not their own work, so I think this is a tension in assisting a creative process. Essentially, some people feel that the device is doing it for them, or the process is doing it for them. And this obviously affects how proud people feel, and whether they feel that it allows them to create sort of a thought or a feeling via the app. So if we look at the heat maps of just essentially video data, you see on the left there's lots of arrangement going around of the text, so they're just playing with the words that they found. And some groups spammed the new word button, so they just repeatedly hit the new word button because they just wanted to find that word. So this new word just takes rejected words from the previous bin of words. Okay, some refinements and limitations. So content complexity levels are positive. People enjoyed being able to make something really simple, just being able to engage with it in their own way. However, people with more severe aphasia found the written words difficult. 1, 2, or 3 words at most would be the most that they'd imagine they could do. Some people wanted more content, so we limited it to 6 poems in the app for the purposes of just running the workshop practically. People want more poems, basically. So I want more choices at the beginning. I would like to be able to choose the topics at the beginning, for example, football. It would help to read out the difficult words. It should talk. So people really wanted it to talk, because having more modalities allows us to better triangulate a word by having the device read it out and also read it ourselves. So here's a bit from the recital. I'll explain each bit as it comes up. Okay, so here is a researcher, Jane, reading a poem written by one of the groups.
Poet voice reads his poems to muddle through every sentence. He must quiet his restless sky.
I like that.
Very good.
Wow, that is very, very.
So there's a male participant in the back left reading a poem that he's
On the
created.
street, the doorway was tasteless.
Oh, that looks
Good.
good.
Oh, that's dark. Dark. Oh, yes, I've got something.
That's a good
now.
prize.
Oh, very good.
Sounds quite profound, doesn't it?
And a female participant reading.
We found love famished in the wild, memorized because love fled.
Oh,
Yeah.
So we co-designed an app with 4 people with aphasia. It provides a new automated approach to constrain creativity by redacting previously written texts. These could be websites, these could be tweets, they could be anything. And there's a lot more on the concept of blackout poetry in the paper. This enables people with aphasia and others to engage in meaningful, elegant, creative writing. So this is available on the App Store. It is free for you to download on iPad. And that's the talk. We have another... We'll be talking about a bit more detail on the co-design process. Katerina Borazeri will be presenting a paper on how we engaged with people with aphasia in terms of co-design process. And now it's your turn. This QR code leads to the app.
Questions, anyone?
Super cool. Thanks. So it was interesting that you also had these ownership issues where people felt like maybe the poem wasn't their own. Did you look at how much people did rearranging in the second portion, and if maybe the more that someone rearranged the words after the erasure, they felt more ownership? I don't know.
So we've not done a correlation. That's a very nice question. It was something that I don't know if we'd have enough data to do correlation, but we do have the stats on how much they arranged it in just raw numerical numbers. I think they're in the table in a table towards the end of the paper. If not, I can give them to you. And we may have taken it out because we thought it was a bit boring. But actually, in that context, it's not boring. But I don't think we'd have enough data to do a correlation.
Did you just get a sense from the people who were in the workshop?
Also, another thing is it was done in groups, so it's a little bit harder to say. A lot of it was so groups of 3 or 4 people supporting each other in different ways.
Cool, thank you.
We have a couple of more questions. Flowers in the back.
Hi, my name is Ari. I'm from the MIT Media Lab. On the ownership thing, I don't know how you run your workshop, but I'm wondering if sort of many people had the same redacted texts and came up with very varying sentences, if that would increase people's ownership of it, or if on the app, I made a sentence out of these words, I could see other sentences or other poems made out of these words. Maybe if they were really different, then I would think, oh, look at mine, it's so much better than everyone else's.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's actually a really nice idea, is to link it back to the original text. So we've been demoing a wall type thing, like a gallery type thing of just these poems. We were demoing it this morning and yesterday, and I think that's a really nice idea. It would be good to add actually where the poem came from, and then show perhaps a link to other people who've made it. That's a very nice idea. Thank you.
One more question here.
Hi, my name is Faraz from MIT CSIL. Great work and even greater presentation. I wanted to ask you, from the table that you presented, the people were not considering that it was their own work, and that was really polarized opinion, because 4 people said that they were strongly disagreeing with that fact, and also 5 people said that they strongly agreed with it. So, what are your thoughts with that? Why was this so polarized? So they're 0, 3, 0, and 4 and 5 on the 2 ends.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in creativity support tools, but I would imagine. For this paper, I did a decent review, and what I felt was that actually some people. So if you read a paper called "Painting with Bob," which is actually it's a great paper if you ever read it. It was published at WIST maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's a great paper. Basically, it's a painting assisting tool, and they had the same results. Basically, they felt that actually this system helped them. But actually, it didn't, help them. It helped them to create a picture, and they were really happy with that. But they didn't feel that actually. A lot of people felt that it wasn't being done by them. So I would imagine that's probably a trend that you would see in the creativity support literature. Yes. I mean, you're the person to ask, right? Okay.